So I just wanted to record some information about a dream I had last night and potentially what it meant. So in this dream, I was at some sort of popular place. It might have been a university or some sort of institution, something along those lines, and basically for some strange reason, there was a large number of people there and they needed to use my shower. But my shower was in an inconvenient location where a bunch of other people might have had to use it. And for some reason, they needed to move it to a new location. And so they moved the shower to a new location. And when they did, something was messed up to where the water wouldn't get quite hot enough. And so I was then at that point sitting at like the top of some bleachers with a bunch of people. And I was discussing this with someone, why the heat might have not been working. And we didn't really know. And then I was at the edge of the bleachers, and then there was the staircase just to the left of me, and then on the other side of the staircase was the edge of the other bleachers where a guy was sitting, and he was overhearing what was going on. And it turned out that he was an engineer, and he got out this notepad and a pencil, and he started writing down this complicated equation for essentially what we needed to do to fix the heat, what was going on with the heat. But then at that point, some angry old white guy, started storming up the bleachers, and he was really upset because having access to that information would have made him, the person writing the information down, and the university liable if there were any damages. And so the university basically didn't want to accept the liability of causing damages, and then that knowledge of the information then needed to be kept from me, and from me having access to it. So it was written on a piece of paper, and then I took the piece of paper and I folded it up and put it in my pocket. And the old white guy, I'll just call him the dean, we'll assume he's some kind of dean or high-level university administrator or something. He said, well, keep that piece of paper in your pocket, because then he was going to take me to somebody to reprimand me, basically, and I was going to need to produce the piece of paper. So he said, okay, take that knowledge with you, put it in your pocket, and you're going to have to follow me. And then I put it in my pocket, folded it up, took it with him, took it with me and him in my pocket. I started following him, and he was walking very fast in front of me, and I basically was trying to get rid of the paper to throw it, like crumble it up and throw it away. And so I was following the guy out, and he was walking really fast in front of me. I crumbled it up, and then I tossed it in like a paper recycling bin. And so he's like walking so fast that I had to run to catch up with him. And so I caught up with him, and I'm following him. And we get to this really nice building. It was like a red velveted carpety kind of building, and we got on this crazy elevator, and we went up maybe like 7 floors to the top and met with this kind of grandiose middle-aged woman, and I could tell she was like the high-level person that we were supposed to meet. And as we're walking down this sort of corridor, we get to these very, very large red wooden doors that entered into this room that I kind of thought, oh, I'm going into an office. Well, it was more like a suite with there's like a giant bed that was unmade and like a vanity. And inside of it, instead of sitting down, we continued to walk. And I started to get the impression, oh, they're trying to intimidate me with their wealth and power. Like, clearly this woman whose office is like a suite, grandiose suite, is a very high level in this whole system because the system was willing to give her that. And as we walked towards the back of the suite, it actually didn't have a back. It actually continued to progress into a giant sort of building. And there was like an arcade with people playing games everywhere, and it was like a publicly accessible arcade where everybody was allowed to just go there and play games, which in retrospect sort of sounds like academia. In the pursuit of knowledge is that everybody goes there to play their games. But anyway, as it progressed through, it opened up into this sort of resort, like a high level casino resort with like multiple different shops and little venues. And I got the impression that this was like a hidden area, like almost like a casino's like back room, but the back room was huge. And again, it was all red velvety carpet. And as I'm going through there, I see like a nice car, like a Nissan 180SX or something, driving through it. And so there was just this, idea that not only is it like a grandiose place, like a place where, only the elite class are allowed to go, but also it's like hidden, this hidden room, this high level but secluded kind of area where people could go and play games and enjoy themselves, but only a select few. And the only reason it was being shown to me was to intimidate me into making a confession, essentially. Well, again, I didn't even have the piece of paper anymore. And so it was like there was nothing I could do. And I think that the resort kind of area followed out to like a large parking lot where people could get in, but it was only the people, like I said, with the secret access. So I'm gonna get a drink of water. I started to think about this morning, and when I have dreams, it's like I will think about, or I guess the dreams that I really remember are usually the ones that house some important information. So the very vivid details are the ones that I remember, because there's some kind of vague details that are kind of flitting around in my head, but they don't quite seem either important or relevant or clear enough. And I know that there was other things going on in the dream that I don't remember, because that wasn't quite all of it or all of my dreams, but those are the parts that I remember. And so usually in that kind of case, if I wake up and it's still really fresh after I'm up and around, then there's some meaning behind it. And so I started to think about it, and I'm just going to talk about kind of what that might mean. So I think basically the shower, like my shower, was like my part of the system. And so I essentially had my role in the system, and that was like maybe when I was brought up to Washington, D.C., and in like getting up and moving the shower from place to place, that was like me getting up and moving my part of the system to place. But the heat not working right was maybe things not working right when, this part of the system was moved from place to place. And so, I, on a personal level, was in trying to figure that out. Well, what's wrong here? Why isn't this, piece of the system, this piece of knowledge, not quite working in this environment? And so I started asking questions. And in doing so, I stumbled across people that had that information. So that would be things like discovering, the ins and outs of everything that was going on from like a sort of systemic oppression kind of standpoint. In DC is like, what are the deep-rooted kind of factors that play into us not being able to effectively implement this project. And so that was kind of like the engineer sharing the information with me, because I remember telling him, oh, I studied engineering for a couple of years, and then so I could kind of break down this information and understand it if I was able to take some time, and he was able to walk me through it. Which for psychology also is like, oh, well, like if I took some time to understand, what was happening, in DC, and really started to unpack the information, now that I had sort of the code or the equation, now I could go back and say, okay, well, now I can really unpack this and really understand the broader sort of issue, which would be like, essentially that the university wasn't set up to solve this problem. And the university had its own interests in mind, and the university didn't want to be liable for solving a very, very deep-rooted issue in society of, systemic oppression of different races and classes of people, and the distinction between the haves and the have-nots, more or less. So, you've got this segregation of society in Washington, D.C., where the haves are literally on the upper part of the river, the northern side of the river, you could say, and the have-nots, those that continue to be oppressed, get stuck down below the river, south of the river, to where they can't even hardly get north of the river to do anything. And so, I think the symbolic representation there is that, the knowledge was moved, like, with me as then a part of the system, as like I was a working part of the system back in Arkansas, and then a bunch of people needed my part of the system, which is just represented as a shower. I mean, it's really a sort of a functional utility, needed that placed then in a different location. And so me and my contribution to the system were then able to be brought somewhere else in a way that it then stopped working. And then so when it stopped working, I started to ask the questions. When maybe like the understanding in the dream was that, well, you could still use a shower, it just wasn't going to be as hot. So it'd be a little bit more uncomfortable and not quite right, but you could keep using it. And assuming you could keep using it, then the university isn't going to catch any liability. But now that I'm sort of starting to unpack this knowledge that is from the university and a part of the university is like, okay, well, here's all these things wrong with the system, then, people that are high up in the university take notice and they say, okay, no, because that's our knowledge and our system, and you cracking the code of what's going wrong here isn't in the interest of the university because that's going to be very costly. And then so there was this stopping of where I had attained the information to then go and say, okay, well, take that with you and then come with me. So before I could fully unpack everything, I was then sort of taken on this journey where I was never quite brought to the punishment as much as I was intimidated, and continually intimidated by the threat of an eventual punishment that I never received. And so in that whole process, maybe they actually wanted me to throw away the information. Maybe that's why the guy ran so far ahead of me that I was out of sight. That and there was a conveniently placed paper recycling bin that he walked right by without looking at me, and then kind of scurried off really fast. And then so it's kind of like, okay, well, you got that knowledge now, throw it away, because if you bring it with you, we're going to ask you to produce it and then reprimand you for it. Why wouldn't he have just taken the paper right there on the spot? Well, because he doesn't need the knowledge. All he needs to know is that I have access to the knowledge. And then so just him knowing that I start to have the code, and then it's there in front of my face for me to decrypt, essentially means that, he needs me to get rid of it. He doesn't need it himself. He already has it. And then so there's this whole process of, okay, well, you're coming with me to get in trouble, and you better keep that with you, because that's what's going to get you in trouble. And then I thought, oh, I can't get in trouble if I just get rid of it. And then so I got rid of it. And then the 7 floors of the creepy elevator, like, I didn't talk much about the elevator, but it was sort of, I don't know how to describe it, red and yellow and sort of almost like biological looking. It was round, and the ceilings were really low, and it felt very uncomfortable. And I rose up the 7 levels, and I'm starting to think, well, I'm reading Dante's Inferno right now about the 7 circles of hell that he descends. And it's almost like in going up that elevator, I was ascending up the 7 levels, meaning that I was sort of in the hellfire of everything originally. And because when I got to the top floor, it felt like I was at the top of a large building, but maybe that 7th floor was actually the ground floor because it led out into the parking lot. And then so rising up above those 7 levels, I then was at the ground floor, back to reality, sort of, instead of out of like the deep of like where shit was happening, which is kind of how it was when I was in DC. It felt like, okay, well, I'm deep in the shit of like where shit is going wrong, like in a big bad way. And then so getting up the 7 floors then took me to a place of like, okay, now I'm back at the ground floor, but I'm actually the ground floor is the elite social class existence. And so in walking through those grandiose doors and meeting those people, that was time for the doling out of the punishment. So I should have just walked into an office of some high-level university administrator, and then they would have said, okay, blah, 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 give me the paper, and then you're not supposed to have this. But instead of actually telling me all that, it was just told ahead of time, to where I was made to get rid of it, like I said. And then I walked into the world where people weren't actually doing anything, they were just playing arcade games. So there was just meaningless games being played. There was no like pursuit of knowledge. It was just here's our casino resort, here's a big flex of all our money, and you go here and you play these games and they're a distraction, and this is your entertainment, and you do this as a way of like us keeping you busy and giving you some free entertainment. It was like, oh wow, this is free more or less, or included in my education, that I get to do all this. Not to say that like that knowledge isn't useful, but like if we're really talking about solving the problems at the heart of society, then what do we do when we think about that deep hidden knowledge that's below those 7 layers, where you try to send somebody down and you try to say, oh yeah, we are solving this major problem, we really want to do something about the fact that others are oppressed and we've systemically mistreated black people for all these years, and then now we're going to fix it. And then so they get all the money so they can wear all the titles of doing that, but really the game that they're playing is to increase their power and influence and wealth by saying, okay, well, we now have, now we're doing something about this, right? And then they bring me up there to do something about it, but they don't want me to work. They know it's not going to work quite right, because they don't want to solve the totality of the problem, which is a much deeper issue. They don't want to incur the cost of really needing to say, okay, we're going to go in here and we're going to fix the deep heart of the problems right now in America. There was none of that. It was like, no, we just want the money. Look how much money we have. And then, oh, you're going to make us liable to pay for all of this, and we have to solve these problems? No. That's not how this works. Come with us and go ahead and throw that thing out on your way out. And we're going to tell you why you can't do that and get you in trouble, and then we're going to get you out of there. And we're going to find somebody else. And so really, that university system and this knowledge production mechanism was only interested in the increase of its own power and wealth, as opposed to an actual understanding of the root of the problem, which would have been, to actually do something, to implement an effective system in place, and then thus have to incur the cost. But instead, now it's just like, no, none of that. Get out. We are the ones in charge. We want this money for ourselves so we can continue to improve what we have, our own sort of ground level private resort casino that we can bring people to, and we can put them on a game that we have. And then really the system of the university casino, whatever you want to call it, is in itself expanding. They are the ones who are holding everything, and those people that are going there are just playing the knowledge games that they have set up. They're not actually necessarily working on problems. They're just being put through the knowledge mechanism, and the university is taking their money as well, and they look at it as, oh wow, look at this great privilege we have to play these games, and it's all included in our costs of going here. But really, they're paying to play those games, and they're not descending into those 7 layers to go deep and solve those deep level problems. They're just playing games. And so, I don't know if there's much more to say about that. It's just really crazy, and I needed to get it down. So, yeah.